Hello and welcome to the DTMBF podcast. My name's Sean and joining me as always is the one and only Dante Boff from Mr. Boffman, man. How are we?
Shawnee, I'm good. I've got a beer at my right hand, a glass of water at my left hand, perfectly balanced, as all things should be. I think maybe, did a superhero villain say that one time? I don't know, I think maybe.
Are you thinking of, what was a wolf mother? Joker's on my right, clowns to my left.
No, I'm thinking of Thanos. But,
yeah, true. You're thinking of all balanced things. I was stuck on the joke that I was going to make 10 seconds ago.
That's weird that you were talking about Wolf Mother, because I was talking about Wolf Mother yesterday.
Why? Because
this girl that I work with, she just puts on like a Spotify mix, and it's just like 2000s rock. And Wolf Mother came on, and her desk is probably about 10 meters away from mine, but there was no one in the office, so she was playing it out loud.
Yeah.
And Wolf Mother came on, like one of the old classic songs from like 2005, and I was like, oh, what a track. And then my boss came over and we were talking about Wolf Mother, and none of us can really remember like anything other than like the two, like Joker and the Thief, maybe Mother.
Yeah,
I think, you know, the famous ones. But he was talking about the album cover. And he's like, oh, that album cover. And I was like, I know exactly what album cover you're talking about. Yeah. And it's that, like, serpentine woman, like, emerging from the waves to point.
Because I had forgotten, I just Googled it. I had forgotten about it until right now. Yeah.
Also, Wolf Mother, Joker and the Thief was on Need for Speed Carbon in 2006.
Yeah.
And I don't want to brag, but I did get over $1 million bounty on a police chase in Need for Speed Carbon in a fucking Volkswagen Golf. And near the end, once I crossed like the 900,000 bounty mark, and adjusting for inflation, that's got to be like 10 million.
Fuck, you're on one today.
Once I crossed the 900,000 bounty mark, I accidentally got stung by like a spike strip, and I lost my back wheels. So I'm rolling around going, can't get over like 15 k's an hour. There's police everywhere. I'm on the highest alert level. There's helicopters. And little old me in my Volkswagen Golf, a bit battered and bruised, I just sneak into a little alleyway, out of sight, out of mind, and I wait, and the bounty cools off, and then I just get to keep it all.
Oh, you got to keep the V-dub Golf.
Yeah, mate. And I had enough money left over to replace my back tyres.
Hey, this is real life. The gamer gets the Volkswagen.
And the whole time I'm listening to Joker and the Thief by Wolf Mother because it comes on the radio.
Yeah. No, those. If you want your song to be remembered for maybe the wrong reasons, maybe the right reasons, put it on a mid-2000s fucking video game like the FIFA 12. Yeah. What's the? I don't even know it, but when it comes on, I have to listen to this whole thing. Do you know the one?
Nah, not from FIFA 12 because you've been exceptionally vague there. But just in general though, how many times have you been out or you've been at a party and a song comes on and you're like, oh, this is a FIFA song?
I tell you what, I've got a playlist on Spotify, and since it's already up, I may as well show you. But have a look at this.
NBA 2K13, love that.
Just a lot of Jay-Z.
You know what I was thinking about a couple of days ago, on my drive to work down Lygon Street, mate, the traffic on Lygon Street the last week has been absolutely abysmal. So I'm just sitting there trying to get over Princes Street, and like I'm like 800 meters back from Princes Street, stuck in gridlock. A lot of time to think, and I was thinking about Madden because I used to obviously be a prolific Madden player, and there was one Madden, like maybe like Madden 15. And they didn't do it before and they didn't do it after. But they replaced the whole soundtrack. There were no songs. It was just like a continuous, like, nationalistic American orchestra music.
Yeah.
Exactly
like the Battlefield 1 loading screen. I know what you mean.
Like,
for the listeners out there, email us at...
But like the Fox, you know, like Sunday Night Football or whatever, it's got like a fucking like anthem. It's like like that, with like trumpets, and it was kind of cool at first. And then you were like, "Fuck, man, I've been listening to this for
a long time,
4 hours straight." Like it, you know, I checked my blood and it was bloody apple pie coming out of it. I was like.
Looks to his left hand, he's got a baseball. The other one's got a baseball bat. Well, it's America's pastime. That's honestly a top 10 Lukey moment. Shout out to the JVG NBA tribute show. And before we do get into some actual podcasting, we should mention, and I feel like this is a disclaimer for all men on podcasts, you probably have to say into the microphone that you went 10-pin bowling the night before you record a podcast, and we did. With the JVG guys and friend of the programs, Alessio.
When me and Marco are up, we call it 1-pin bowling.
Marco was so shit. Marco did everything in his power to throw that thing as far as he could, stutter a bit, and just smack that far left pin. And he, like, if he was aiming for it, he hit it about 5 out of 10 times. Precision. It was awesome. But no, at the end of the day, I did win on a buzzer beater that I didn't even know was hotly contested until 10 minutes ago when you told me.
Very, very hotly contested. Because we all had a couple of like warm-up shots. Like, it was probably round 4 before things really
came out.
Yeah, well, fucking alright. Alright, Chief. Before things really solidified and it became clear who was good and who wasn't. And you know, pretty quickly came out as like you were the favourite going into it. But then you kind of confirmed with your play, like, oh, Sean's actually pretty good bowling. Famously got 147 one time, which is a pretty good score.
Yeah, well, pretty handy. As soon as you tell anyone that the top score is 300, they go, that seems less than half.
Well, the people in the know that 147 is a great score. But, you know, anyway, I digress. You kind of were pretty clearly doing bits pretty early on. And then me and Aless went on a little bit of a run, like probably end of the 3rd, start of the 4th.
So I called a timeout.
And then we kind of closed the gap on you pretty substantially, and I stumbled at the final hurdle, didn't quite make it up to your score, but Aless came in hot with like a spare, a strike, and a 9 or something in his last 3, and he ends up on 107, and then you
on 10. Well, I was on 99.
Yeah, you were on 99. And so you've come in, and I think you've got... What did you get? You must have got an 8 on your first one.
I think I got a 7.
You think you got a 7 on the first one?
There were 3 pins left. I just couldn't see them.
There were 3 pins left. So you needed 2
to win,
one to draw.
Yeah.
And you came in and you kind of fucked it a little bit.
Yeah.
It was not your best at all. You kind of choked. And the first pin, it goes down, no problems. Doesn't look like anything else is going to happen.
Like it's going to be a draw. No, you don't mention that. The pin that I absolutely throat fucked bounced against the wall at the back and then span back, and the wind of the pin just grazed.
There was no contact on that pin that fell over, like none whatsoever, and it just teetered and swung and eventually toppled over. 108, 107, Sean Means. And
let's go home! Let's go home!
Especially immediately alarm bells were going off.
Could have killed for a laugh, and that was cringe as.
Nah, don't worry about it. We'll get it in post. Immediately alarm bells are going off with the rest of us. And especially against the backdrop of the Qatar World Cup. Where corruption has been kind of like corruption in sport has been like a bit of a hot topic over the last week or two. For you then to come out and knock a pin over without it being touched by anything else to win the game, all I'm saying is like I'd love to get on Sportsbet and see who had money on you to win, because it's something bad's not quite sitting right. And I'm not just being a sore loser. Although it may sound like I am.
Me, the humble old peninsula rich with natural gas, simply played better than the rest of everybody. But speaking of rich peninsulas, Utah, Salt Lake City, you know, the landlocked peninsula.
Oh, jeez, we got to get you back in Year 12 geography.
We'll start off with today's episode. We're just going to go through news once we stop talking about bowling. And there was a big report from Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports this season of Yahoo Sports.
What's Jake Fisher doing?
The funky fish swimming through the DMs.
Nah, you didn't. Nah. I was trying to tee you up so that you could America's pastime that one into the home run stand.
What's the answer there?
Jake Fisher, he's doing yeoman's work.
I'd forgotten about that.
I will be saying it every time we have a Jake Fisher report in this episode, so brace yourselves.
And maybe even in the future. But the Utah Jazz, his report was that the Jazz intend to keep Jordan Clarkson and Larry Markkinen out of trade talks. This signals, alongside some of the other reports that we've seen from the Utah Jazz, this signals that they're quite happy being atop the Western Conference and they would like to stay there. As we record this podcast, which is on the 24th of November, they are currently 4th in the Western Conference with a record of 12-8, but they are half a game behind your Phoenix Suns, who sit at the 1 seed. Also, just a quick mention, the difference between the 1 seed and the 10 seed is 2 games, which is amazing. The difference in the Eastern Conference between the 1 and the 10 is 5.5 games. But the Jazz, this is very much they want to win and they want to stay up at the top of the West, and this is a signal from Danny Ainge that no, we are going to try and win games, that we're not going to tear it down after a hot start, which we'll get into whether that's the right decision to make, but the report also mentions that Utah they have a high asking price for Jared Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley, Mike Conley, and Kelly Olynyk, but they could be available. So what did you think when you saw this report, Dante?
Well, we talked about it last week that, in a vacuum, I don't think it's the worst move in the world for Utah to play this out and make a move later in the season, because I feel like I've said this a million times in the 3.5 years that we've been doing this show, but Jordan Clarkson is the exact sort of player that contenders go sniffing around at the trade deadline, because there's going to be 2 or 3 playoff teams that say, geez, we're not getting a lot from our backcourt, we're not getting a lot from our bench in terms of scoring. Who's someone who we can just lay down a first round pick and just get?
Yep.
And Jordan Clarkson is that guy. If you put a good first round pick on the table or 2 bad ones, that's getting the deal done. And Markkinen is a bit of an interesting case because we're voting open today. He'd be in All-Star consideration, averaging 22 and 8 and, shooting over 50%, almost 40 from 3. But we're obviously aware...
We've got a big enough sample size to know that he's not a number 1 on the championship team.
This could be fool's gold. We don't actually know how sustainable this is.
Yeah.
So Markkinen, a bit of an interesting case on that front. But, I mentioned off the top, in a vacuum, I like this, but we talked about it last week that every week, every win that the Utah Jazz rack up takes them further away from what should be their end goal, which has been bad this season. And by the time they're ready to think about moving Clarkson or Markkinen, if they do get there eventually, let alone Beasley, Gay, Conley, Olynyk, the guys who realistically should be available.
And the guys who are going to expire by the end of the season.
By the time they get to that point where they're ready to move them, it's already going to be too late, because there are a couple of teams, not as many as we thought, like we touched on last week when we kind of did a tanking deep dive, but there are a couple of teams in each conference that are just bad, and they're going to be worse than what the Jazz could possibly end up being.
We pretty much know the bottom 5 lottery order already, right? Because they're doing such a good job at losing games.
So the Jazz, it's kind of like now or never for the Jazz, and this clearly indicates that they're going to move forward with this group. And I think it's interesting.
Is it the right call?
I don't think so, because again, all of that considered, the asset play, the opportunity to tank and get a top pick, the opportunity to tank and try and get Wembanyama, generational, game-changing, Giannis level talent. You get him, and within 2 years you're contending. That's one thing that makes you say on paper that they shouldn't be doing it. But looking on the court, they started like gangbusters. They started 10-3. Their offense has really been carrying them. On the season, they're 10th in offense, third in offense and 9th in point differential, according to Cleaning the Glass. Over the last 2 weeks, they're actually 21st in point differential, and the bubble has kind of burst a little bit, and they've started to rack up some losses. Some of them have been tight, but tight against good teams, but they're kind of...
I think they also had 2 schedule losses, so I'm a little bit cautious to say that, because that is... it's a small sample size of a small sample size, but they had 2, 3 games and 4 nights in that sample.
So you say
hold on.
You say wash those, wipe those away though.
Yeah.
If they're 3-5 over their last 8. So if we say 2 schedule losses and we say they're 3-3, if 3-3 and middle of the pack in kind of like net rating, point differential, whatever metric you want to use to catch all, if that's a realistic reflection of what they'll be for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 games, then that's not enough of a reason for you to do this and hold on to your guys. If you're legit a 10-3 sort of team and your offense is top 5 and your defense can be passable and you think you've got a top 4 seed sewn up, then do it. But I don't think that's the case here.
See, I look at it differently because I think there's heaps of teams that could just get hot and do some good things. I look at it and go, who on this roster is good enough to ensure you stay where you are and is going to be good for years to come? So like Larry Markkinen, the team's best player right now, he's 25 years old. He's shooting the lights the freak out. But I don't think Larry Markkinen, I mean, he might be an all-star today, but I don't think Larry Markkinen is someone who's just going to carry you to mid-40 wins for the next couple of years. Their probably best prospect might be Colin Sexton, right? And like, who knows what you're going to get from him coming off a major knee injury. But I just keep thinking that this team is a lot like the 2013.
Sexton's been good, by the way. Like Sexton, I think,
he's good.
If they decide to unleash him.
Yeah, he's coming off the bench now, but
he's shown that I think he's got a you know how I feel about him, but I think he's shown that he's got more to come. Yeah, it's just there's too much skill overlap between him and Clarkson.
Yeah, but what do you do? Like I think this team has a lot of the 2013-14 Phoenix Suns. So what would you have done if you were the Phoenix Suns, who famously won 48 games and missed the playoffs, made the play-in? It just didn't exist yet. What would you do if you guys had made the playoffs? Would you have been like, okay, run the band back? We're just going to keep banging our heads against the wall with a 30-year-old Goran Dragic? Or would you do... Well, what would you have done if you'd made the playoffs as a Phoenix Suns? Would you be, as a fan who wants to win a title, would you have been super confident saying, all right, let's just keep doing this, even though it didn't look like you had very many upside guys?
As a fan, I would have, if we had made the playoffs, I would have been optimistic. And going into that next season, I was optimistic. I think on a management level, the thing that they underestimated was that the 3-point guard look with Dragic, Eric Bledsoe, and Isaiah Thomas wasn't
the answer.
The answer, and wasn't sustainable, because what ended up happening was, although Bledsoe and Dragic had played together for a few years, there was not enough defensive.
I guess we never really got an answer because they brought an IT, and that could be blamed for maybe not being that great.
Well, IT was marginalised. Yeah. IT was completely marginalised, and then went on to Sacramento to just
Boston.
He came from Sac, didn't he?
I thought you said, he came from Sac. Yeah.
Well, he was a guy who was putting up 20s a game, and he came in and was third guard status, and kind of wasn't.
Oh, my bad. You were talking about before.
Yeah,
ignore me.
Yeah. He wasn't able to kind of like fully thrive in
Phoenix
in the ecosystem that was established, but his presence kind of like. Although he was being marginalised, his presence on the court kind of marginalised the other guys. And then by the time, you realise Bledsoe was unhappy and wanted to be like the lead guard, like it was kind of like, it was done. So I think rather than it being like a grave personnel and coaching overestimation, I just think that it was an overestimation on what they actually had and how sustainable that was. And that's very relevant, because if you start talking about if Markkinen's averaging 16 points and playing like Larry Markkinen that we know, who's a good player, but limited.
Not an all-star.
A good starter on his day, but, not on his day, a bad starter. You're right in saying that there's not enough upside guys here to kind of like be confident in them taking the next step, because you'd be looking at someone like Vanderbilt.
Or Walker Kessler.
Vanderbilt and Walker Kessler are guys that you should be wanting to invest in and keep around, but the ceiling on them being like great players is pretty low.
Yeah,
their skill sets, whilst they're both young and still have room to grow, like the odds on either of them becoming dynamic offensive players to complement their already quite good defense is pretty low.
Yeah.
Sexton was available for a reason.
Yeah.
And that's, both health related and fit related, there's reasons. Like there's no one else who you're kind of thinking long term could be someone that pops to help you sustain it. So it really, it really does seem short-sighted to pursue this path, if indeed that is what they're doing, because I just wouldn't be surprised at all if this is
to drive the price up.
Not even necessarily actively driving the price up, but just a smokescreen.
Yeah.
It just seems too difficult to talk yourself into.
Yeah,
talk yourself into it, and I just can't believe that Danny Ainge is saying this is how we want to move forward.
I mean, something you mentioned in the off season was the fact that Danny Ainge has done it before, where he's had a star like Paul Pierce, and he's just waited until he could make that trade to turn him into a title contender, which in today's NBA seems nearly impossible because everyone's sort of learnt from their mistakes of the past. And you were talking about doing that with Donovan Mitchell, and I think it's much less of an interesting proposition to do that with Larry Markkinen. But there was a report earlier in the week, I think Monday or Tuesday, coming from Shams Charania of The Athletic, that the Jazz had interest in trading for John Collins. If anyone sees John Collins as that guy who's going to come in and be that star, that second star, I would love to pull them aside and have a conversation with them. And we'll talk about John Collins later in the episode. But Jake Fisher, Yahoo Sports / Yeoman's Work, sort of threw water on that report in this one that came out last night, saying that the Jazz aren't entertaining a deal based around Larry for Collins whatsoever. They don't want to include Larry in that deal. Honestly, if the Hawks could do that, I would love to watch Hawks games after that. But John Collins is the sort of dude who's like, he used to average 20 points. Maybe you can bring him in and he'll win 55 games. But it's like, no, that's not who he is. And if the Jazz do want to go out and trade for a guy, throw in Colin Sexton, Vando, Walker Kessler, all the picks you just got for those two guys, you've all of a sudden got nothing, and are hoping that Larry can be the alpha or the beta next to another star who you might bring in. So it's just sort of like there is no upside here. And I actually, heading into this podcast, I was a little bit like, fuck, this sucks. But the fact that you've just said that maybe this is a smokescreen just to buff up their price at the end, because what if Johnny Ainge turns around in February and says, I wasn't going to trade Jordan Clarkson, but, 2 first-round picks, I'd be stupid not to. I could see that. I could see that happening.
You can definitely see it. And I mean, the fact that, both the Gobert and Mitchell trades kind of came out of nowhere to teams that weren't considered front-runners. There wasn't this, endless hubbub of
New York saying that we're going to get him.
Exactly right. With Gobert, people were talking is Dallas a fear? Where could he go? New York with Mitchell was the number one thing, and then bam, both of them kind of came out of nowhere. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of that going on. That there's that Danny Ainge is just running a tight ship. Because it is hard to talk yourself into this perspective. And I mean, you mentioned Collins, pairing Collins with Larry Markkinen would be an absolute fucking disaster. And Lowry is someone who, as good as he's playing right now, and as good as we know he can be offensively, because he does have that skill set. He is someone who has mobility and defensive limitations that mean if you want to have a decent defense, at least you have to plan for him with who you're playing at the 5. And right now they're playing him next to Walker Kessler or Kelly Olynyk, and it's going poorly defensively because they're really bad. They're kind of hemorrhaging points at the moment.
Yeah.
He needs to be playing next to a mobile rim protector, and that kind of really limits your options for who you're looking to bring in at a 4-5. Suffice to say, Collins is not that player. Yeah. So I think that would be incredibly unlikely. But who they, if they were to pull the contracts together and throw in Sexton and all the picks, that player also has to kind of be able to...
Well, let's just say Bradley Beal. Can that person do it themselves if they were on the trade market, not doing it for their previous team?
Yeah, I mean, that specifically would be an absolute abject disaster. Yeah. But...
maybe they all are.
They're in a difficult position, with Lowry specifically, because you're kind of saying, well, he's the best thing we got right now, so we don't want to make a move that marginalizes him. But in order to make a move that doesn't marginalise him, that doesn't really exist, or you're paying everything that you just got to, and like you said, you don't want to do that and then leave the cupboard bare. it just seems too obvious to pivot to the hard tank and trade these guys and get the picks and figure the rest out. Like it seems very cut and dry. You can't really make a case like you can, say, in Indiana.
Yeah.
Indiana can conceivably say, we've already got Halliburton. Mathurin is better than anyone expected right away.
Yeah.
If we let those two guys develop this season and next, we keep Buddy Hield around, we keep Miles Turner around, we could be a top six team, like,
which is all they want to do
next season.
Yeah.
That actually kind of like, you're like, yeah, if things broke right and those young guys continued to get better, that's possible.
Also, Benny, Matt, and Halliburton, you put them on the Jazz, and I would say they're those upside guys who might take it.
Utah just don't have those guys who you're saying, like, if things break right, we could be good right away.
Yeah.
So that, and the fact that their play is kind of starting to maybe drop off a little bit, like they're not at those highs that they were, it seems really obvious that this is the move. So that's why I do have a hard time believing that there's nothing coming down the pipeline.
All right, let's move on to that John Collins chat that we were talking about. Another report from Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports saying that the Phoenix Suns aren't interested in trading for John Collins. This was a follow-up from maybe a week ago when obviously there's still the buzz going on around the Jay Crowder stuff. Mathematically, I don't know how you would trade for John Collins without giving up a good player in return, which is not something you want to do, to trade for John Collins.
Yeah.
I'm happy to not actually talk about this because I know your opinion on Phoenix Suns trading for John Collins, but do you just want to talk a little bit about the poor guy who averaged 20 points a game for the first couple of years of his career? What do you do with him? And I've only ever been negative when talking about him, and I feel quite bad because he's in such a tricky spot. And you look at it, you take a step back and say, okay, well, he can score, he can get to the rim, he can, he's got a cheeky little jump shot, and he's got a nice little push shot.
He can shoot,
and he's a good screener, and he's a good roller. But he can't really defend fours and he can't protect the rim. So it goes, damn, that sucks. Well, maybe he's also not worth $20+ million a year, and maybe the Atlanta Hawks shouldn't have given him that deal, which is why they waited for the last possible minutes to do it, but there was nothing better out there. So, like, are we simply just twiddling our thumbs until John Collins is a free agent and signs for, the mid-level exception for a good team? Or is that the next time he's going to be a great player?
Nah, that's unsustainable because he's in the second year of a 5-year deal. So he's got 3 years after this left at that 25 mil number. And I think he's another player like Lowry and like a few guys across the league who are obviously really talented fours, but that conundrum that you laid out, you can't defend fours on the perimeter, and you can't protect the rim. That means you have to be supported in a way by the team building that's really difficult to kind of get overlapping, overlapping skills.
There's only one Brook Lopez.
Yeah, there's only one Brook Lopez, and there's only a handful of guys who could cover for you. We're talking about who would be good to play next to him if he was playing the 5. Like you could look at like a Vando, you could look at like a McDaniels from Minnesota.
Yeah.
These guys who can defend the perimeter and can protect the rim. Problem solved. And then offensively, it's just absolute disaster because those guys are the inverse. They can't do the fours job.
Yeah.
On offense, means
but not even that. Like, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Like, the upside of having everything built around John Collins is, okay, those Hawks teams before Trae Young got there, well, that one Hawks team before Trae Young got there was in their position to draft Trae Young.
But I mean, like Collins is better. Collins, I think, is a better player now, a more well-rounded player now than he was then. And those Hawks teams as well, when they had Collins, at the 1, so Collins at the 5 and Young at the 1, they had nobody 2 through 4.
Yeah.
Now they obviously do, but you're right in that, like, maybe the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Like, he's 21.7 points per game in that career year that he had maybe 3 seasons ago now. That 22 a game isn't worth as much as a 22 a game on a good team. So I think it's reasonable to say that, like, he isn't necessarily like going to be that 20 a game kind of scorer, but like he's a good shooter for a 4. He's a great screener. He's a great roll man. He can fucking finish. We know that from seeing him absolutely detonate rims his entire career. But it just kind of seems like he's the archetype for that difficult to fit in 4. And there are some 4s that, that he can defend. But it's just that...
when you hit the playoffs, he's not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, well, or when if you hit the fucking game 12 and someone decides that we're playing John Collins, we're going to fucking go small at the 4, then it's done. Like that's it. He's not a turnstile out there. It's not like we've got Bismack Biyombo trying to defend 4s out there. But yeah, he's not good enough at it to be sustainable.
And fingers crossed that Paolo Banchero is good enough on offense to be unsustainable at the 4, potentially if he keeps going that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's give the bloke more than 20 games to figure out if he's unsustainable at the 4.
But that would be the archetype, and it's like, okay, Paolo might be the engine that gives you a top 5 offense. John Collins isn't.
Well, John Collins has none of the skills that allow Paolo to be potentially the engine that fuels a top 5 offense. None of them whatsoever. They're actually completely different players. But yeah,
on defense, I'm talking.
But where have the suitors gone? Because last season we had this trade deadline chat. Things were going badly in Atlanta. There was bust ups going on. Trey, Collins aren't happy with each other. We're talking is this going to be the moment that he gets moved? Yeah.
Well, even this off-season, he wasn't talking to the team and etc.
Pre-Gobert, Minnesota is an interesting fit for him because, whilst Cat's definitely not a good defender, offensively, that would be a really interesting combination because, Cat is the second best shooting big man of all time, to give respect to league MVP Dirk Nowitzki, and NBA champion, not for nothing. Cat and Collins offensively would be just dynamic. That would be so nice. Defensively, we'll see. But the Spurs were another one before they had kind of fully pivoted into the tank. That was maybe the Spurs could just get him at a cheap price and make him a centerpiece of their offense that at times struggles to score.
Yeah.
Hurdle most certainly could defend the rim for him, although that leaves the unsolved problem of Collins playing out on the perimeter a little bit more.
Yeah.
But there's no one really else that's emerged now that seems like it's a good fit. Miami's name got floated out there last week, but
it's just for his contract. Mate, if he is getting paid $10 million a year, fine. But for his contract, it's you would rather just trade for Christian Wood in the off season. Christian Wood getting paid less and can do more with the ball in his hands.
The problem is that I think he is a $25 million a year player. He just doesn't have a $25 million a year role.
Yeah. That's so fucking well worded.
That's the fundamental problem is that this guy is a really talented basketball player and he just fits nowhere.
Yeah. All right, one more piece of news before we head to the break. The Detroit Pistons are no longer considering Saddiq Bey off limits in a trade. Again, coming from Jake Fisher of.
Wow, can I just say, this guy's doing yeoman's work.
Doing yeoman's work. Who's yeoman? So
who is he?
In the past, the Pistons haven't acknowledged calls where people have been trying to trade for Saddiq Bey, but this season is apparently different, where they're willing to put him into a deal. In the article, they mentioned that he is extension eligible this off season and will be a free agent next off season. But we'll translate that for you and say that it's because he's in his 3rd year of his rookie contract. So you can also just not trade him and just have him there as a wing who might pop as, the next Trevor Ariza, but with a little bit more volume. This season, Saddiq Bey is averaging 14.7 points while shooting 40.8% from the floor and 29% from 3. I don't see this as anything. Obviously, maybe he is off limits if he's not shooting well and he just doesn't factor to be a starting small forward in the league. But this isn't okay, Saddiq Bey's available, go get him. I think he's still a young player who can still be a good player. Again, just 3-and-D wing. I don't see much in this report. What do you think?
I think it's interesting because I think Saddiq Bey is actually kind of coasted off of a strong rookie season at times.
Yeah.
And I don't actually think he's that good.
Yeah, right.
I'm kind of not on the Saddiq Bey train because he doesn't he's you just read the numbers out, but he's not a good shooter.
Yeah. He's a high volume shooter.
He shot 38% on 6.5 attempts a game as a rookie, and that number has gone down in the 2 seasons since.
Yeah.
Along with his field goal percentage, he doesn't really get to the rim that much. Doesn't finish well.
Although been getting more free throws with every season that he plays. Up 4.5 this year.
Yeah, well, I mean that's good, and it's always a good sign to see that going up because that can help you to maintain a more consistent and efficient offensive approach. But what hasn't happened along with that is being a better finisher at the rim.
Yeah.
Actually being able to make the easy ones.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can't be a bad rim finisher and be a bad high volume 3-point shooter, it doesn't work. And I feel like he's also not that good defensively. Like, he's a big body and he's a good rebounder. And he's got really long arms, so he can kind of like contest, but I just feel like he's not a fundamentally technically sound defender. So him being now on the table, like I like this just seems like they don't want to pay his next contract because they don't think he's the starting small forward either. And if they can get,
and he's going to ask for 20 mil.
Yeah, they don't want to be the one to throw down 20. And if they can get a first for him, I think they would just rip. Because what was he? He was like pick 9 or 10 or something. Like that.
He was like 43.
Nah, come on. Can't be saying that.
19th. Split
Okay.
down the middle.
I think whilst he's definitely proven himself to be like a rotation level NBA player already, if they could get a first round pick back, then I think they'd be happy to do that.
I mean, wings are always in demand. He should, in theory, be in demand.
And he has shown, he has shown enough that if a team wanted to talk themselves into him as like a long term option, then that's good.
Yeah.
We mentioned Miami before, but Miami seems like a good fit for him.
Miami seems like a good fit for everyone.
Anyone are you between 6'7" and 6'9" and weigh between 215 and 240 pounds? The Miami Heat want you.
Yeah, they've been giving a lot of minutes to Jamal Cain, I think is his name. And it's like, man, he's a wing. They're
crying out for someone who's 4 size. I mean, Saddiq Bey can. You probably think of him more as a 3, realistically, but he can definitely play the 4. He is definitely like an option at the 4.
Yeah.
In a very Crowder, Cam Johnson-esque kind of way.
Yeah.
Where you're happy with him at either spot. But yeah, I think the fact that he's available and that this is coming out now is a sign that Detroit doesn't want to be the one that's paying that next contract.
Yeah. Best of luck to him. All right, let's take a break and come back.
The depth, the deep 2. God, that's a mouthful. Anyways, I'm Marco, co-host of the Hey, Daniel Gafford, what's the name of our podcast?
The JVG NBA Tribute Show.
Wow, I can't believe it's that easy. Thanks, Gaff. You probably know us as 2 members of the 4-Man Weave plus Marco, but we know you as our next listener.
Well said, Lucas. I gotta ask, how do we differ from the pack of basketball podcasts?
It's a great question, Marco. You see, on our basketball podcast, we have 2 male co-hosts.
Wow, truly groundbreaking. After this episode, stay on your favourite podcasting app and give us a spin.
And we are back. Next piece of news is a little bit of a shit piece of news. But coming from Shams Charania of The Athletic, saying that the Los Angeles Lakers and Detroit Pistons are, quote, monitoring, unquote, the Miles Bridges situation. Miles Bridges, he hasn't been charged yet. I
believe he has been charged, and I believe he was convicted of
and
domestic assault,
which he pleaded guilty to. Isn't playing basketball at the moment. Didn't sign his qualifying offer with the Charlotte Hornets. Isn't going to go to jail, but I think there was some massive sum to pay. Which, I mean, if you listen to our episode, we assume that might have been the case.
He's definitely not in prison.
But the official word from Adam Silver is that the league is currently conducting their own investigation into the situation, which, reading between the lines, means if he doesn't sign with anyone, we're just not going to worry about it because he's not in the NBA and we don't want to have anything to do with him. But if he were to get signed by the Lakers or the Pistons, then the league would have to step in and give him their own punishment, whatever that may be, a season or something longer than that. So yeah, we knew this was going to come. You and I aren't shocked to read these reports. We knew eventually a team was going to be like, oh, what happens to that that wing that averages 24 points a game or whatever it was. So a little bit interesting that we do have these first drops here. I think if it is a sign, if he is going to get signed, whether that be the Pistons who want to lock him down for 5 years, or the Lakers who are very much like, let's just get good players in the door right now, I think he almost definitely would be suspended for at least 12 months.
I think it's difficult to say that.
Yeah? Well, what do you think would happen?
I think he would be suspended by the league, but I don't know that it would necessarily be that long, because there's no precedent for the league being the justice dispensary on something like this.
Yeah,
because usually if something of this nature has happened, like someone has committed a violent crime, which is what this is, usually they go to prison, and the league doesn't have to worry about.
Because the court's done it.
Because the court's done it for him, and they don't have. But in this instance, ethically, it is quite clear that he shouldn't be allowed to just come back and play. But navigating that, I think, actually is quite difficult. And to draw a comparison to the NFL, which has been plagued with domestic violence issues over the last 10 or 15 years, they have often struggled to adjudicate this appropriately. And give a ban that seems to be the right amount of time.
Yeah.
Obviously, the NBA is a much more progressive organisation than the NFL, but I still think that principle holds true, that it could be difficult for them to say what the number should be. Especially when you get the Players Association will be involved on this and will be advocating for Bridges to be able to play.
Yeah.
So that's something that you have to kind of think about in this as well. So whilst I would expect it to be a hefty suspension, I don't know that it would necessarily be a season.
Yeah, I think a sign that you're correct is that the Lakers are here, and the Lakers wouldn't have put their name out there to Shams if they didn't think it was going to be, because they want to be good today and they want to be good yesterday. So if it is in the realm of possibility that he would miss the entire year, they would say, okay, well, we're just not going to sign him. We need players to play today.
Yeah.
Pistons obviously a little bit different, because they might look for a bit of a value play trying to get him for multiple years.
Which is so sinister.
Well, if Saddiq Bey goes, they've got a little bit of room for jokers. That was a little reference to one of the final games of the season last year, where Saddiq Bey, after the film Joker came out, dyed his hair green and scored 41 points. Was it 41 or was it 50 or something?
I think it was 51.
Yeah. I had him on my fantasy team, and it was fucking beautiful.
Yeah, that's found money.
Because most people will sit there and be like, oh, that's kind of cringe. I'm like, hey, fucking dye your hair green often if you're going to score 51 points. But I think you are right, Dante, and I don't know if it's nice to hear that you are right. Because what does the league do? Because as soon as they do step in and do something, then you're going to get a cohort of people, including the players' union, that are like, well, he's served his punishment in the eye of the government. He's served what society thinks he should have through the courts. And then anything on top of that is Adam Silver, him saying this is what should happen. And maybe he's completely right, but is that what the union is going to think? So,
and we've seen
tricky and sinister.
We've seen that this sort of thing isn't just a blank canvas for what Adam Silver thinks is right to be projected onto.
Yeah. That
we have a rough idea of what Adam Silver's moral conscience is, excluding things related to money, i.e. China.
Yeah.
On social justice issues and on not beating up your partner in front of your child issues, things of that nature, which is now we don't just use the word alleged or allegations or whatever.
He did it.
Miles Bridges did
I know
something.
you're not a fan of Turner.
He did something terrible, something absolutely vile, and we know that Adam Silver, with the idea that we have of his kind of values, thinks that domestic violence is bad and thinks that players who are domestic abusers should not be just allowed to be in the league. But there are lots of mitigating factors that will kind of muddy the water, and it's not Adam Silver's decision to make on his own necessarily. Although you'd think he's he's the commissioner, like he can kind of take executive action, but in reality it kind of doesn't necessarily work like that. And with potential new CBA coming next off season, and there's going to need to be negotiations coming between the players union and the NBA and the owners on like a lot of really important things, I will be pretty confident in saying that the Miles Bridges hill isn't the one that Adam Silver's going to die on if it's going to really get on the nerves of the Players Association.
I was going to wrap this discussion up, but listening to a podcast on Dunked On where I think it was Larry Coon who came on, or someone like that, one of the cap geeks, who was talking about the upcoming CBA and what to expect. Keith Smith, that's the one. And he said that this is right now, heading into these negotiations, the best relationship between Players Union and the NBA that has ever happened in NBA history since people like you and I have started focusing on it.
Because there's more money than there's ever been, and everyone's
that
getting
helps.
paid more.
That helps. Obviously the Players Union is going to do what they can for the players, but I think at the end of the day, the Players Union is not going to sit there and be like, nah, this is where we draw the line. This absolute shit bloke has to play in the NBA.
No,
tournament.
but you know,
I don't think it's going to ruin a relationship.
No, I don't think it will either. But you don't want division and divisiveness like heading into that. On an actual like team side of things, the Lakers obviously, we know, are fucking pretty desperate.
Also, just another player who's probably best at the 4. They love fucking getting them.
I mean, if you're gonna play him at the 4 and play AD at the 5, that's a pretty good closing lineup.
Maybe LeBron will stay injured.
Yeah, maybe. But you know, we know the Lakers are desperate to even be considering this, but the Pistons kind of getting involved as well. And you talk about looking for a long-term value play is, along with like what we discussed last off-season, which thankfully didn't come to pass, where Charlotte maybe might have looked to use his indiscretion and potential suspension and potential prison sentence, which is what was on the table at the time, as a bit of a long-term value play to lock up a $25 million player for 10 a year. Which is, it's quite sinister and quite kind of like... We love just like watching the game, loving the game, cheering for our teams, being like, oh, did you see this guy did that? Getting in the group chat, saying some funny stuff to each other. And then the same teams that we're cheering for and the same players that we're saying like, oh, like there's this, this darker side to it that like everyone's just trying to do whatever they can to get a leg up. And sometimes that doesn't always... look or feel good at all. Yeah,
it's not like trading DeMar DeRozan from the Raptors.
DeMar DeRozan from the Raptors is the type of sadness that I want in the NBA. That's like, oh my God, that hurts to see him go, but like you understand why they did it. This is,
So, for those reading between the lines, Dante is not rooting for Qatar in the World Cup. Let's wrap up with the final piece of news from the week, which is sort of a little bit of a look back and a point and laugh coming from Dave McMiniman of ESPN, saying that last trade deadline, the Los Angeles Lakers turned down a first-round pick from the Toronto Raptors for Taylor Horton-Tucker. The matching salary in that deal would have been Kem Birch, or something like Kem Birch, which, a good backup centre. But the Lakers decided to hold on to THT to make a playoff push. One push that they eventually lost to a team in the San Antonio Spurs who probably didn't even want to be there too that much. Taylor Horton-Tucker's star's really fallen.
Yeah, it has really fallen, and he's currently buried in the Utah depth chart.
He's just a stretchy wing. The crazy thing is he's 22 years old.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, he kind of, like, burst onto the scene and was actually, like, good.
Fine, yeah.
Good,
fine. Different words mean the same thing.
He hasn't really put anything together at all. And he can't shoot. So if you're if you're a big 2 guard and you can't shoot, that's a problem. When I saw this, I was like, obviously thinking about it from the Lakers' perspective. But thinking about it from the Raptors' perspective.
Yeah.
Why would they want Taylor Horton-Tucker?
They used that same first-round pick to get Thaddeus Young in the end.
Yeah.
But they're just addicted to 6'7" guys who are iffy jumpers.
Well, THT's not even that big, but he's got long arms. He fits the long arm.
He'd be big if he had a neck.
Damn, he's catching strays. That is a real point and laugh moment. But like, I was kind of like, wow, like a guy with long arms fits the Raptors so well, but a guy with long arms who like isn't a great playmaker and can't shoot doesn't actually really fit the Raptors at all. Did the Raptors dodge a bullet by not trading for THT?
Yeah.
And the fact that he's 22 years old and is now playing in Utah, who, in theory, although not in practice thus far, should be looking to give young blokes a chance. Good to see the young fella get a run. The fact that he's kind of like buried. He's playing 17 minutes a game in Utah, and Colin Sexton is ahead of him on the bench, and Jordan Clarkson's obviously getting started minutes. There's no like role for him, so obviously we can say the Lakers have messed up there, because think about
just having a pick just to trade for someone.
Just to send out, another asset in the chest. If you had that extra pick, maybe you could have got off Russ. Maybe you could have got off Russ and only given up one of your late picks. You could have, given could have been the 2029.
Yes, 3 picks and
Well, not just 2. Like you say, we'll give you the 2029 and the Raptors pick.
Yeah.
To take Russ.
Yeah.
Instead of the 2027 and 29, and then you keep that in there.
Actually, sorry, let me fact check you. That pick would have been Malachi Branham, because it was a current pick. It was the pick for the upcoming draft.
Okay.
Which was Branham or one of the other guys the Spurs drafted, because it was eventually used in Thad Young. Yeah. Well,
regardless, I think the Raptors have dodged a bullet here, and
Blake Wesley.
Blake Wesley.
Fuck, I haven't actually seen him play basketball yet. I watched a couple of Spurs games, but let me just quickly go on his basketball reference page to see what Blake Wesley's been doing. Blake.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I've got nothing to contribute.
He's played 2 games.
Yeah,
he's 19 actually. Yeah, right.
Really good to see the young fella get a run in those 2 games though.
Well, in 11.5 minutes, he's actually averaging 8 points a game. Don't even get me started on his per 36. He's per 36, 25. Jeez. 6.3 assists from your 2 guard. You take that.
Jeez, this guy can really play. This guy can really shoot it.
Actually, I've got this memory of being 17.
Me too, brother.
And I was at school, obviously being school in Australia. Everyone goes, "Oh, Sean likes basketball. I'm going to talk to him about basketball." Matthew Dellavedova is a name which links those 2 things, Australia and basketball. And then someone's like, "Dude, get this. Delly's averaging 21, 8, and 4 rebounds." And I'm like, per 36. Whoa, how'd you know that? They're reading like sportingnews.com.au. Anyway, so I feel like that's a good place to wrap up. But just before we do wrap up, obviously socials, do all that stuff. Basketball forever, follow everything. Best place to get all your content. I'm just going to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions.
Oh, I love this. I love getting stuff wrong in a public place.
Yeah, this is very black and white with a tiny bit of grey area.
Okay.
Upcoming soccer matches that people would be watching / have watched when they listen to this podcast. Who's going to win between Uruguay and South Korea?
I'll go Uruguay on that one.
Who's going
Fede Valverde to get a couple in that one.
Honestly, I just want one. I want one word, please. Who's going to win between Tunisia and Australia?
I'm going Smokey. I'm going Australia. Because you got to do it for the culture.
We had this discussion last night. You actually don't have to. Final one, England, USA.
Oh, England.
What's the final score?
3-1. Who scores for the USA? Josh Sargent.
See that fella from Leeds?
No.
They're all from Leeds. Little America. Dante, it's been an absolute honour talking to you on episode 175 of the Deep to NBA podcast. I will speak to you next week, which will be 176.